Hi, I'm Rashonda Kay. This is Rashonda's Reading Room. We are reading Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins. We took a little bit of a break to read the short story Talma Gordon, and it was very interesting, so I'm glad we did. But now we're back with Hagar's Daughter. We are on chapter 6. Marthy was horrified to see how her mistress arose from the couch where her husband placed her, fall on her knees beside it, and burst into wild, tempestuous sobbing. Lord, Missy Hagar, Lord, honey, don't cry so, don't, honey. Hagar suddenly arose, caught her by the shoulders, and turned her toward the light, minutely examining the black skin, crinkled hair, flat nose, and protruding lips. So might her grandmother have looked. For mercy's sake, is you sick, Miss Hagar? Cried the girl, frightened at the strange glare in the large dark eyes. But Hagar turned away without replying. Marthy hurried downstairs. My soul, mammy, she cried as she burst into the kitchen. Miss Hagar done clean destructed. I like Miss Hagar done gone clean distracted. Once more, Hagar crouched upon the floor. She felt like writhing and screaming, only her tongue seemed paralyzed. She thought and thought with agonizing intensity. Vaguely, as in a dream, she recalled her stay in Rose Valley and the terror of her childish heart caused by the rough slave trader. Could it be true, or was it but a hideous nightmare from which she would awake soon? Her mother, a slave? She wondered that very thought did not strike her dead. With shrinking horror, she contemplated the black abyss into which the day's events had hurled her, leaving her there to grovel and suffer the tortures of the damned. Her name gone, her pride of birth shattered at one blow. Was she indeed a descendant of naked black savages of the horrible African jungles? Wow. Okay, wow on a few levels. The first is were they really naked black savages of the horrible African jungle? I question that. But two, even if that is accurate, look at you. Yes, they are your ancestors. But if you're a descendant and you don't look the same, then why would you automatically ascribe what you imagine that they look like onto you? And were they really all that savage and horrible if they produced you? Anyway, I'll keep reading. Could it be that the blood of generations of these unfortunate ones flowed through her veins? Her education, beauty, refinement, what did they profit her now if, horrible thought, Ellis, her husband, repudiated her? Her heart almost ceased beating with the thought, and she crouched still lower in the dust of utter humiliation. Wow. She's on the floor. She's in the dust of utter humiliation. Her tongue is paralyzed. She's suffering the torture of the damned. Her name, her pride of birth shattered at one blow. Her education, her beauty, her refinement, all were for nothing now. If the white man who was her husband says they're worth nothing. Like, did we, let's not gloss over that. Okay, her education, beauty, refinement, what did they profit her now if, horrible thought, Ellis, her husband, repudiated her? So all of these good things that she has going on for her can completely go away at the word of one white man. At the word of, what's his name, Walker, her walls started crumbling, but they will completely fall at the word of Ellis. Like, that's very interesting. No one person should hold that much sway in somebody else's life. If that's the kind of sway he has over her, was she a slave in her marriage? And lots of people would say yes. At this time, a lot of people aligned the drudgery of slavery to the drudgery of being a wife. I feel like it's better to not be owned, but I am not unsympathetic to what it must have been like to be a wife when you could own no property. Like you couldn't even get a credit card in your own name until the 1960s. The 1960s. What kind of foolishness is that? Meaning I'm a wife in the 21st century and my husband's fantastic. But I can see where these women were coming from. And if they lived in a totally different time and with totally different men, like it, like I can even see how now a woman can have nothing of her own if everything is in her husband's name, all things go through her husband. Anyway, I'm way off the rails here. That's what you get when you sign up to work with me. All right. When you sign up to read with me, because I have all the thoughts about all the things, which is actually what I love about reading. It connects. It doesn't matter that we're reading something that was published in 1901. The emotions, the situations, it connects. And that's one of the beauties of reading. All right. Then she rose and walked about the room. It was crowded with her wedding finery. She touched an article here and there with the solemnity that we give the dead. They were relics of a time that would never return to her. Oh, wow. Like things from yesterday are now relics of a time that would never return to her. She examined her features in the mirror, but even to her prejudiced eyes, there was not a trace of the despised chattel. One blow with her open hand, shattering its shining surface, and the pieces flew about in 1,000 tiny particles. She did not notice in her frenzy that the hand was torn and bleeding. Then she laughed a dreadful laugh, first silently, then in a whisper, then a peal that clashed through the quiet house and reached the sorrow-stricken man in the silent library. He shuddered, but did not move. He could not face her yet. Aunt Henny and Marthy stood outside the locked door and whispered to each other, Missy Hagar done gone mad. I mean, I'm making light of some of how quickly all of this happens, but I can't begin to imagine what earth-shattering blow that might be. Although it's not clear if she knew beforehand, like she seemed to recognize Walker. I'm not sure what she recalls and what she doesn't recall. I will keep reading to see that, but I can't imagine this sort of turn of events happening in my life. I would be distraught too. But it's interesting to me that so she looks in the mirror, she sees no trace of, what does she say? The despised chattel? Is that what she said? Yes, that is what she said. But even to her prejudiced eyes, there was not a trace of the despised chattel. And then she breaks the mirror and she starts to bleed. And that's really an interesting juxtaposition to me, that with her eyes, she sees no difference. And then she bleeds, and there's no difference in our blood. So that's really interesting. All right, she paused an instant in her ceaseless promenade about the room. Beside the dressing table where her husband's picture reposed in its nest of silk and lace, she paled and shuddered. Could she expect him to forget all his prejudices, which were also her own? Slavery, its degradation, the pining and fretting of the Negro race in bondage, had always seemed right to her. Could she expect him to forget all his prejudices, which were also her own? Slavery, its degradation, the pining and fretting of the Negro race in bondage had always seemed right to her. Although innocent of cruelty to them, yet their wrongs were coming home to her in a twofold harvest. Yes, Ellis would give her up. He must. It was his duty. Only this morning she was his wife, the honored mistress of his home. Tonight, what? His slave? His concubine? Horrible fatality that had named her Hagar. Somewhere she had read lines that came back to her vividly now. Farewell. I go, but Egypt's mighty gods will go with me, and my avengers be. And in whatever distant land your God, your cruel God of Israel, is known, there too the wrongs that you have done this day to Hagar and your firstborn shall waken and uncoil themselves and hiss like adders at the name of Abraham. Then she gazed once more upon the pictured face with the strained look we place upon the face of the dead before they are hidden from us forever. They brought the child to the door and begged her to open it. She heeded it not, let it die too. It too was now a slave. Wow. Although there are definitely stories of slave mothers killing their children, better to be dead than to be a slave. I'm not sure what I'm thinking, so we'll just keep reading. The night passed. It was dawn again. There were sounds of life from the house below. Someone came slowly up the stairs and paused at the door. Then Ellis's voice, sounding harsh and discordant, said, "It is I, Hagar." She opened the door. She nerved herself to hear what he might say. The sense of her bitter shame overpowered her, and she shrank before him, cowering as he closed the door and stood within the room. Twice he essayed to speak, and twice a groan issued from his white lips. How could he bear it? She stood before him with clasped hands and hanging head, as became a slave before her master. How changed, too, he thought. A blight had even fallen upon her glorious beauty. He who had always upheld the institution as a God given principle of humanity and Christianity suddenly beheld his idol, stripped of its gilded trappings and all its filthiness. Then in his heart he cursed slavery. Good for him. Hagar, I have bought you of that man, Walker. He will not annoy you again. She did not speak or raise her eyes. Ellis bit his lips until the blood ran in the effort to restrain himself for her sake. I have thought the matter over, and much as I wish it might be otherwise, much as I would sacrifice for you, I feel it is my duty as a Southern gentleman, the representative of a proud old family, to think of others beside myself and not allow my own inclinations to darken the escutcheon of a good old name. I cannot, I dare not, and the law forbids me to acknowledge as my wife a woman in whose veins courses a drop of the accursed blood of the Negro slave. Oh. Oh, so in his heart, he cursed slavery. And I guess he's cursing it because it's taking from him everything he has loved. But he cannot acknowledge as his wife a woman in whose veins courses a drop of the accursed blood of the Negro slave. And so let's see. He says, Hagar, I have bought you of that man. He says nothing of their child, and he says nothing about manumission. I have purchased you. He doesn't immediately follow that with, I have freed you. And it is his duty as a Southern gentleman. Whew. Still, she stood there motionless. Ellis was in torture. Good. Why did she stand there like a forlorn outcast in stony despair? 'Cause she is. Speak, he cried at last. For God's sake, say something, or I shall die. It's all about me. I'm gonna die if you don't talk to me, if you don't forgive me. Mm. Then she raised her eyes to his for one fleeting moment. I do not blame you. You can do nothing else. He moved a step toward her with a smothered groan. Dearest, dearest, he whispered, and the tone of his voice carried in it his unshaken love. Do not, do not, broke from her white lips, and with a smothered cry of agony, her reserve broke down and she flung herself upon the couch, face down. Ellis went to her and knelt beside her with his arms about her. 5 minutes must have passed while they communed in spirit. There was no sound but the girl's hysterical sobbing. I am going away, he said at length. I cannot stay here and live. I may never return, but I shall leave you amply provided for. Then he rose to his feet and rushed from the room. She heard his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor and paused before the door of the nursery. Oh, okay. He's going to go away. He will provide amply. What is she supposed to do? Just pretend like she's white and the mistress of this and her husband went away. Walker and whoever else knows isn't going to let that happen. He'll just snatch her back. He'll be like, yeah, you paid me for this slave. And so I sold her to you, but there's this fugitive slave law which will let me take her back anyway. If Ellis leaves her, there is no way she's not going to be returned to slavery. Does he not recognize this? Oh my gosh. And so, okay, he pauses before the door of the nursery, like, okay, finally, we're thinking about this kid. Ellis loved his wife devotedly, but the shame of public ostracism and condemnation seemed too much for inherited principles. An hour passed. Once more, Ellis resumed his measured pacing in the library. The clock ticked slowly on the mantel, but the beating of his heart outstripped it. He could not follow the plans he had laid out as the path of duty. His visit to the nursery had upset them. Parental love for his innocent wife, was too strong to be easily cast aside. The ticking of the clock maddened him. It seemed the voice of doom pursuing him, condemning him as a coward, coward, coward. He could stand it no longer. Once more, he mounted the stairs to his wife's room. Anybody else thinking of Edgar Allan Poe with this ticking of the clock driving him to insanity? Hagar, I cannot do it. We cannot alter the fact that we are bound by all the laws of God and man for better or worse. I have thought it all out and I have planned a way. Okay, good. Way to hold fast to your marriage vows. It is impossible, she said in quiet despair. You cannot overcome this fearful thing that has fallen upon us. I myself think and feel as you do. It is enough. I accept my fate. Oh, no, no, do not say that. Yes, Ellis, she repeated, her face like snow in its pallor. Hagar, you do not know what you are saying. You love me, and I love you as my very soul. How were we to know? How could we tell? Therefore, having committed a sin in innocence, if sin it be, and I do not believe it so, for things appear in a different light to me now, we will together live it down. Surely heaven cannot fix the seal of this crime on us forever. I like it. The supplication of his voice, his speaking eyes, shook Hagar's heart, so tired and worn with emotion. Her eyes were full of compassion as they rested on him, her lips firm and cold. I love you, Ellis. You know that. And by that love, although I am your slave and chattel, I know that your love demands not for your wife, but honor. The force of circumstances cannot degrade you, cannot change your chivalrous nature. Great heavens, you misunderstand me. I have no hope, no life apart from you, and I hold you as I cling to salvation, my love, my soul. Listen, Hagar, I have a plan. Bending over her, he rapidly outlined a plan of life abroad. They would be remarried and sail from a northern port for Europe. There, where the shadow of this crime could not come, they would begin life anew. He had mapped it all out carefully, and as she listened, she was convinced it was feasible. It could be done. I like it. I don't get why they have to get remarried. I mean, I guess they were married under false pretenses. I don't know what that does to the child that they already have that was conceived in marriage. Like, I don't know what laws or whatnot were about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't want you to have to move, but sure, move to Europe. Do it. Be fine. Live free. Although, seeing as how there's a lot more book left, I don't know if that happens. Neither of them noticed that the door was ajar. Neither did they hear the light footfall that paused beside it. It was St. Clair. Walker was right. We must stop that game, he muttered to himself. Well, and that is chapter 6 in Hagar. And I've been saying Hagar. I told you when I started. I don't know which it is, and I say both. In Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins. Until next time.